Welcome to Our View, the podcast, where we're changing the conversation about disability one story at a time. Here at Our View, we're all about education, awareness, and shifting perspectives. With each episode, we dive into honest, meaningful conversations with individuals from across the disabled community, amplifying voices, sharing lived experiences, and challenging the way society sees disability. Because disability isn't a limitation, it's a part of the human experience. So pull up a seat and join us as we broaden the view and bring real, powerful stories into focus. This is Our View. This episode of Our View, the podcast, is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. All In for Inclusive Education is a New Jersey-based nonprofit organization that supports inclusive education for all students with disabilities as a fundamental civil right. All In for Inclusive Education views inclusion as a means to creating an equitable, socially just, democratic society. All In's vision is of a society where all individuals are valued members of their community and have opportunities to reach their maximum potential. For more information about All In, follow them on social media on Facebook at All In for Inclusive Education and on Instagram at All In for Inclusive Ed. Also, be sure to visit their website, www.allinforinclusiveed.org. I would like to welcome everyone back to a new episode of Our View, the podcast, where we aim to educate, raise awareness, and change the tone of conversation about disabilities. I'm your host, Arthur Aston, and I am joined today with my guest, Vanessa Lombardo. So, Vanessa, thank you for joining me for this conversation today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So to start off the podcast, I ask all of my guests to introduce themselves. So can you share your story with us? Tell us who you are, what you do, some of your hobbies or things you like to do in your free time. And also, I know this is a very difficult question, but can you explain what inclusive education means to you?
Mm. Oh, wonderful. So as you said, I'm Vanessa. I am focused on assistive technology in my field and really thinking about the way that it empowers people to be as independent as possible. Really thinking about quality of life and wanting people to really achieve their goals. And the way that I got into assistive technology, my background is as a special education teacher, and I was working with transition age students. So students who were, for different years, 14, 15, 16, and up. And what I realized is the power of technology to have students achieve their goals, and especially when we're thinking about obviously education, but preparing students for adulthood, young adulthood, middle adulthood, older adulthood. That is really what struck me and resonated with me. In my student teaching, I had the opportunity to work with a teacher who I think really was ahead of her time in terms of implementing not only technology for students, but getting students out into the community, having that community-based instruction. We were often out, and about with students and learning all kinds of different skills. And that was really where I started to see. She primarily was working with some low-tech tools, which, of course, obviously, when we talk about assistive technology, it's a whole continuum of low-tech, mid-tech, high-tech. But I really saw that power. And so that's really what, that's what got me really interested in delving into assistive technology full time. And I have worked in the field of assistive technology for 20 years in lots of different roles. I've worked with students of all different ages, all different types of disabilities, as well as adults. And it's always been with that focus, looking at the individual person, thinking about what is going to make the most sense for them in achieving their goals. And that's always at the center. So when I think about inclusive education, I really think about it as proactive, right? I've been in the field long enough to see, and anyone who's been in the field of education, frankly, for any period of time has seen lots of change and lots of things, come and go. But I think when we are proactive, when we're setting up students for success, that's really where we see, I think, sustainability and that change. It's when we're reactive and kind of thinking about inclusivity, accessibility as an afterthought or kind of a retrofit that I think we really don't get to that place of students achieving their goals. So when I think about inclusivity, I really think about being proactive and setting students up for success.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And as you mentioned, the assistive technology world that you are involved in, I always found that to be interesting because it's so much. It includes so much, and so I'm excited to for you to share some of those things about your presentation today. But yes, inclusivity is so important. Um, in the world of education, because thankfully for me, I didn't have the experience of being excluded. I was always in the general education classroom growing up, so I don't have that experience. But to hear some of the stories of what takes place, uh, it's important that we have these conversations about inclusive education and having all students included in the general education classroom as much as possible. So, again, thank
Mhm.
you for sharing your story and how you're connected in the world of assistive technology. And I'm excited to hear more of about your presentation. So, what I didn't mention earlier is that this episode of the podcast is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. And that is absolutely such an important thing for me to mention. But in January, you presented at the All In Winter Inclusion Conference. And your presentation was titled Inclusive by Design Implementing AT and AAC with SETT, UDL, and CITES.
I
So,
mean, I always joke that in education, what we do is acronyms. Like
yes,
that is what we do. If you can't boil something down into an acronym, right? It's not clear fit into to education. But I would be happy to talk about each of those acronyms because I do feel it's important to name our terms so everyone knows what we're talking about.
yes, yes. So, to start, can you please explain the acronyms, what they mean, and also can you just give a brief summary of what your overall presentation was about?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that I actually just wanted to say very briefly. So the way that I came about in terms of presenting at the All In conference, as I had mentioned, I've been and worked with the group over a period of many years. But in my current role at the Assistive Technology Center at the College of New Jersey, we are partnering with the New Jersey Department of Education Office of Special Education. And our whole mission is to provide professional development to professionals and families supporting students with disabilities in New Jersey schools. So we do presentations very often in terms of promoting some of these best practices. And so that's a little bit about just my role and how I ended up to be at the All In presentation. And like I said, we present at many different conferences and events throughout the year in New Jersey. Um, but this idea of this presentation, this inclusive by design, kind of speaks to that proactive approach. And then some of the acronyms and some of the frameworks that I spoke about. So AT, assistive technology, AAC, alternative and augmentative communication. So supporting someone who has a communication need with, again, some type of technology, low, mid, high tech, same thing with assistive technology. And then the three other acronyms are really these frameworks to think about how do we get at designing content, designing lesson plans, designing curriculum that is inclusive, again, from the start, right? Not reactionary. So the first one, SETT or SET. So this is a framework that was created by a woman. Her name is Joy Zabala. Unfortunately, she has since passed away, but she was a pioneer in the field of assistive technology. And really, the whole point behind this framework is to think about how we're delivering assistive technology best practices to students. How are we kind of mitigating the abandonment of a tool, right? Kind of thinking through what is the process for getting assistive technology into the hands of a student, whether it's, again, AT, assistive technology for maybe a literacy support, or that AAC, the communication supports. How are we doing this, in a way that makes sense? So the acronym stands for, the S stands for the student. So really thinking about the student first. What do they like? What are they working toward in terms of their goals? Are they a high tech kind of a student, right? Do they like, to use a lot of technology, or maybe not? So we're contemplating all of those things at the very start. The E stands for environment. So the question is, in what environment is the student utilizing this technology? Is it school? Is it home? Is it a combination of all of those? Is it out in the community? When they're in school, are they in one classroom all day? Are they changing, classrooms? So thinking about the environment and then the aspects of each environment. Is it noisy? Is it quiet? All of those things. So the S is for the student, the E is for the environment. The first T, there are two T's in this framework. The first T is for task. And this is about, what do we want the student to do with the technology? I like to say very often that the technology is not the lesson. The content is the lesson. So what is the task? What are we trying to get students to accomplish? And then the last T is for the tool. So that in order to think about the right tool, we have to think about the student, the environment they're in, and the task that they need to accomplish. So again, it kind of puts that tool at the end. It basically is flipping on its head this idea of giving a student a tool, let's say that's readily accessible, such as a Chromebook or an iPad, and not really taking into account very specifically all these other pieces. So that's what the SET framework is about. The next acronym, which might be very familiar to educators and others as well, is UDL, Universal Design for Learning. So here we're thinking about, well, first I should say, this was created, really born out of the Center for Applied Special Technology, or CAST, C-A-S-T. This is back in the 80s, really thinking about how can technology provide a better educational experience for students with disabilities. And over time, the UDL framework has had a few different iterations, and there's just been an update last July, actually, of 2024. And so what this framework, so again, UDL is not a place, this is a framework, a shift in terms of thinking about how are we providing content and educational experiences to students, and really looking at it in terms of these three pillars. Many people may have heard of that in terms of the UDL framework being made up of three pillars. So it's multiple means of engagement. That's like the why of education, like what is motivating the student. Multiple means of representation. That's in terms of the what, like how are we presenting information, whether it's visual, auditory, tactile, a combination of all those things. And then multiple means of action and expression. And that's the how, right? How are students demonstrating what they know? So in terms of this inclusive by design and thinking about content through this UDL framework, it's really thinking about that proactive approach, right? How are we as educators designing content that is inclusive for students? And then, of course, my piece of assistive technology is then, where are we inserting technology in this? So maybe is it the way in which what motivates students? Maybe having something digitally and something very engaging is very motivating. sometimes it's very distracting, right? Again, we're looking at back to that SETT framework, the student at the center and what, motivates them. So that's in terms of when we're talking about assistive technology and UDL, how that framework and how are we implementing technology into it. And then the very last framework is CITES. So CITES. Again, this was also, it comes out of CAST, as we had mentioned. And this framework is newer. It's directly related to the 2024 National EdTech Plan, as well as work through UNESCO, and really thinking about giving districts a framework for a step-by-step approach for really identifying and removing barriers to the implementation of inclusive technology, assistive technology, and really providing districts with that framework. So where SET is looking at an individual student, and UDL is thinking about it at kind of that classroom level and the creation of content. The CITES framework is looking at it from a district level. And there are different components of the CITES framework. There's leadership, infrastructure, teaching, learning, assessment, and then the family engagement piece. So again, looking at assistive technology, how are we creating the district in terms of having a framework to help us with the implementation of technology? So that was really how I took this presentation, talking about different types of technology, but how are you bringing it from the student level, then up to the classroom level, and then the district level? Because if there isn't that continuity, that's where things again kind of start to fall apart a little bit, or again they become reactionary, and that it becomes like a one-time thing. So for this student over there, we're going to create all of these all of these supports, but for the many potentially other students in the district, that's not something that we're going to do. And so it makes it a little bit easier to have all these frameworks. So that's what the presentation was about, and really blending all of those things together and looking at them as not separate initiatives, but that they're all really part of the same thing.
Thank you for that. It's as you mentioned, the proactive part, starting ahead of time and doing all of this ahead of time, and putting the student first, and all of that, and it's so important. This work as a whole of working toward inclusion. And I had to write a note when you were talking about the AAC device. Uh, and you use the word when the student has a communication need. That like that like blew my mind, because we always hear things like special needs, and it's like, no, they're not special. Like they just have a communication need. So the words are really important. Words matter. So I wrote
Absolutely.
that. I like had to type had to type that out to make sure I brought that up, because it was, early when you first started talking. And it was so important that you said that, because it's just a communication need. People communicate differently, and technology exists so that we can all communicate with each other in different ways. And so
Mhm.
I wanted to bring that up, and how important that was, that you shared it in that way, that it's a communication need. So
Sure. Well, and one thing just to really, I like to use the word harp on things a lot, and I
mhm.
do like to harp on things, but the reason why I like to frame it in that way is because it's specific, right? It
Yes.
really gets at matching the student need to the feature of a device. And this
Hmm.
again goes right back to that SETT framework. We're not talking about a general tool or a general need. We're talking about something very specific that this student needs some support in to be successful. And so when you get into that area of specificity, then you're going to get the result, right, of the student meeting their goals, of them being, in this case, when we mentioned obviously communication, being able to communicate their wants, their needs, their ideas they're able to demonstrate what they know, right? All of these things. So when you speak in generalities, and I love that you said words matter because I say that all the time. Um, as a side note, I am a mom of three. I have two teenagers, a high schooler, a middle schooler, and then my youngest is in fifth grade. And I often say that to them, right? Words matter. Um, and so, like I said, when we're speaking in more specifics with students, then we're really going to get at um, them reaching more likely to get toward reaching those goals.
Yes, absolutely. So, at this point in the conversation, I would like to take a break so that our listeners can learn more about our sponsor for this episode, All In for Inclusive Education. All In is offering a fee-based series of engaging online workshops. These workshops are designed to equip educators with the latest strategies to create inclusive classrooms, foster student skills and independence, and to build well-structured learning environments where all learners can succeed. The workshops are running throughout the summer and the fall, so visit www.allinforinclusiveed.org/webinars for more information and to register today. So we are back to continue our conversation with Vanessa Lombardo. And you just shared about your presentation that you presented at the All In Winter Inclusion Conference. So at this time, can you tell us one or two important takeaways that attendees would have learned from attending your presentation?
Absolutely. Um, so I think kind of a bigger idea, and I mentioned it before, but maybe to say, inclusive education, the way I think about it is that it's a continuous process, kind of thinking through as educators, what are we doing in the classroom? How are we designing the content? Is it utilizing those principles of UDL? And that we all know, certainly, everyone is trying and no one is perfect. That's certainly not even a thing that is possible, but that we have this element of reflection and redesign, right? So we try something and it doesn't quite work and we try it again. And just thinking about inclusion in that way, that we're utilizing these different systems, we're trying something out, and then we're reflecting on it to think about how things are working and how things are moving forward. Um, Another key takeaway that I like to think about is especially around UDL, that that it is this approach, it's a framework, it's a pedagogical approach that really will improve learning, accessibility, and participation for everybody, right? We're talking about all in, we're talking about inclusive education. But sometimes that gets lost in the minutia. I find that people will say, well, UDL, for students with disabilities. And it's like, actually, the entire point is that it is universal. That's what that U stands for, universal, designed for learning, and that it really is intended to raise, I think, the bar for everyone, and especially for students with disabilities, that it provides that equal access, right? That we're, really that we're really intending to do, right? That we're raising the bar. That there that saying of all boats rise, or rise up in a rising tide. This idea of designing for everyone, and then everyone is able to have that that access, and obviously participation as well. And the last thing, and I did some demonstrations of this during the presentation, but there are so many technology tools, or really features, you could say, built into all the devices that we are using all the time. Whether it's an iOS device, such as an iPad or an iPhone, whether it's an Android-based device, whether it's a Chromebook, a Windows machine. If I always encourage anyone to take a look at those accessibility settings that are, again, built in. So this is not purchasing anything. These are options, features you can turn on and off. Every company is updating those accessibility features all the time. Every new update seems to have some additional features and or just some more robustness of existing features. So if you haven't looked in the accessibility features of your device, whatever device it is, in a while, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at that. Um, and so when I think about this, we want to have students understand what those features are that are available to them. And for a number of reasons. Number one, they are there. They're free and they're available. And so it gives students that level of advocacy, right? And agency to look and see what's there and see if that helps them. It again in achieving those tasks and completing different things and achieving their goals. And it also gives the student information about what is most beneficial to them. I say this statement all the time too. Every student in K-12 education becomes an adult and they move on from K-12 education into whatever that is, right? Post-secondary education, vocational employment goals, a whole myriad of different things. And we want them in competitive employment. So one way to get at that is to utilize the technology features, again, that are built in. And of course, there's other additional features and additional tools beyond all of that. But if a student understands that they can comprehend information better when it's provided in an auditory way, and they listen to the information and that is beneficial to them, then that could really be helpful to them in an employment situation because now they'll be able to advocate for their needs and be able to share that with an employer. Potentially, again, as just one example. So one of the other key takeaways of this presentation was what is already built in. And again, we just did a couple different examples of a few different ones from each platform. But I really find that for students, when you're speaking to an older student who's thinking about, what they're going to do after K-12, and if you even ask them, engage them in, well, what kind of technology do you use? What features do you use? Sometimes they can't articulate that. So then that's putting them at a deficit that they're, in order for them to really understand what works for them, we need to help, I think, give them that language, right? That maybe, again, if it is auditory feedback, that's text to speech. It's built into every major platform. It's built into a ton of different tools and devices. But if students don't have that language, then it's difficult for them to advocate. So that was the last kind of key takeaway that we talked about, really looking at those accessibility and built-in features for educators, what could they implement in their classroom? But also for students, what things can we enable for them that they also have the ability to turn on and off and really see what works for them in achieving their goals.
Thank you for that. And it's so important that you bring up the iOS devices and all of the current technology that's out there that have, like you said, the built-in features that are already there that come with the phone, that come with the computer, the iPads, and all those other devices. But even with
Oh,
Zoom,
yes.
and other virtual, video programs, they have the closed captioning that's available that you can turn on
Exactly.
and off, the AI transcripts that can be written, and
Hmm.
even Apple Podcasts now provides transcripts for
Hmm.
podcasts, which wasn't always the case. So that's,
Hmm.
fantastic,
Right,
fantastic
right. And
features, yeah, that are available.
yeah, absolutely. And that again is the crux of UDL. So, right. So
Yes.
again, think about a YouTube video, right? If it has the closed captioning. So
Hmm.
maybe I personally don't need to have the closed captioning on, but if someone needs it, they click it and there it is, right? As a
Right.
teacher, when you're showing a video, we want the captions to be displayed. Maybe it would benefit someone. You don't need to have a hearing impairment to benefit from closed captions.
Right.
But that's what we're saying, really. When we're talking about inclusive by design, we're saying that we're providing these features to everybody universally. And if you need it, great. And if it benefits you, wonderful. But we're really trying to bring this all together so that it's not just this own, separate thing. And as you said, text to speech or even speech to text, right? I use that on a very regular basis as
Hmm.
well, when you're doing multiple things at the same time. So yeah, so really that is such a good point. And again, I just want to elevate that all of these things, everyone is using them, right? Predictive speech is another good example. If you have
Yes.
texted on your phone in the last 15 years, maybe more, right? You know what predictive speech, what predictive text, is.
Yes.
And so again, you do not have to have any type of disability in order for that to be beneficial. So that's that. Those are the principles of UDL really in action, I think.
Yes, so thank you for the summary of your presentation and also outlining some of the takeaways that attendees would have learned from attending your presentation. And to wrap up our conversation today, can you provide some of the useful resources that you use for any of, for assistive technology or UDL? Can be, books, movies, websites, videos, anything that you would suggest for our listeners to check out about these topics.
Sure. Oh my goodness. Absolutely. So as I had mentioned, let's start with UDL. So again, really created by CAST. So their website is cast.org. So that is CAST.org. And that is where you will find the UDL guidelines, information about accessible educational materials or AEM, as well as the CITES framework. CITES, again, is CITES. The Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems. So you can find all of that information directly from the CAST website, CAST.org. In regard to assistive technology, there are quite a number, and I actually wanted to point to our Assistive Technology Center. We have a website where we have curated a list of a lot of different resources. I'm going to name a couple as well. CAST, of course, is one of them. But you can find our website for the Assistive Technology Center it is atcenter.tcnj.edu. When you get there, there's a link on the very top that says resources. And we've divided them up into New Jersey-based resources, nationwide resources, and then resources specifically for families and caregivers. I find as well when we're talking about, of course, empowering educators and educational professionals, related services providers, child study teams. We also want to make sure, and of course, in the CITES framework, talked about that family engagement. But that is one thing that we take very seriously at the AT Center. We really want to provide information to families and really bringing families into that team and making sure that their voices are heard as well. So anyway, so on the AT Center website, under resources, just one or two that I would mention, more so for educational professionals, but I did want to highlight the work of another acronym, QUIET. So that is the Quality Indicators for Assistive Technology, QIAT. Their website is qiat.org. And they have created sets of guidelines and best practices really designed, I think, to ensure that AT is utilized effectively. And so there's different matrices and different indicators that they've created. And so I think those resources are very helpful for school teams as well. Um, and then the very last one, assistive technology specific, that I would just mention is the Assistive Technology Industry Association, or ATIA. Again, their website is atia.org as well. And they are really, I mean, globally, they are one of the leading organizations that really represents assistive technology, and they have so many resources around advocacy, networking opportunities. They bring, service providers, manufacturers, all kinds of professionals and together, from the AT field. Um, so those would just be a couple. Again, there's many, many more. Again, they're listed on the website. But those are definitely a few specifically around assistive technology that I would like to highlight.
Vanessa, thank you so much for this conversation, for sharing about your presentation, and for those great resources. It's great that there's so many things out there for people to look up and to learn more about assistive technology and universal design for learning and all of these great topics that help make educators better people to assist their students. And so thank you again for your time today and for sharing about your presentation. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Wonderful. I did as well. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Our View, the podcast, where we amplify the voices and stories of those in the disabled community, one conversation at a time. If this story moved you, taught you something new, or sparked a different perspective, we'd love to hear from you. Write a review of the podcast on Apple Podcast and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Follow us on all social media platforms at Our View for Life 25. At Our View, we believe that disability is not a limitation. It is a powerful part of the human experience. So until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep seeing the world through our view. This episode of Our View, the podcast, is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. All In for Inclusive Education is a New Jersey-based nonprofit organization that supports inclusive education for all students with disabilities as a fundamental civil right. All In for Inclusive Education views inclusion as a means to creating an equitable, socially just, democratic society. All In's vision is of a society where all individuals are valued members of their community and have opportunities to reach their maximum potential. For more information about All In, follow them on social media on Facebook at All In for Inclusive Education and on Instagram at All In for Inclusive Ed. Also, be sure to visit their website, www.allinforinclusiveed.org.